right, so how's everyone doing? You doing okay? I'm going to get started and intro myself. Do you want me to start in prayer? Do you know? You're like, whatever. How about I just start just saying a prayer, and then whoever comes in, we can go from there, okay? So God, we are grateful for just an opportunity to come and hang out and have some good conversation about this topic that resonates with all of us in some way or form, no matter where we find ourselves in life. God, I pray for clarity and for a sense of peace of mind. I pray for the people, even myself, that have come here to have this discussion, that whatever it is that's on our heart, if there's anything that is troubling us or concerning us, if there's any way you can provide a sense of relief and understanding, and that we could all leave out just with a better confidence in knowing that we are whole in you, we're loved by you, that we're received by you, and regardless of what culture, whether it's Christian culture or secular culture or whatever messages that come our way, that the only message that counts is the message of wholeness and unconditional love that comes from you. So we're grateful for that. Pray for those that are on their way. Pray for those that are here. And just pray for a great conversation. In Christ's name, amen. So thanks for coming. Usually people that come to, there's this episode of Sex and the City, which I have a tendency to quote, where Carrie Bradshaw is giving a talk about singleness, and it's to a room of 14 people. Not even. It might have been 8. And they're like, you're supposed to just tell me how to be single, And she's up there and she's giving this talk and this intellectual lecture, and they're just looking at her like, okay, you don't have anything to tell us, And then the next day she comes back and she's like, let's just all go to the bar. And so that's how they go out. And she's like, I feel like this needs to be practical. I'm tempted to do that. I'm not going to do that. But my name's Christie Adams. I'm just going to intro myself. I got invited by Austin, the Foundry, and I just really appreciative of being here. I am originally from New Jersey, made my way to California for a little while, lived in Washington, D.C. for a little while, worked at Georgetown, and moved back to New Jersey, and now I'm at a boarding school as a chaplain and a religion teacher called The Hill in Pennsylvania. So I've been in different settings in different backgrounds. I think that there is a consistency with this particular message, but with this sort of topic of singleness that I have sort of received indirectly my entire life, no matter what setting that I found myself in. So I found it really interesting. But I am not an expert on singleness. When I wrote a book about singleness, I didn't set out to write a book about singleness. Originally, the thought behind it was, I don't want to write about singleness. Why? Because there's a negativity around it. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that a lot of the things that I had been experiencing in the stories were all under this cloud, this negative cloud, that all came back to this negativity that's around singleness. So that's why I called it the Misinterpreted Gospel of Singleness. Let's see, I don't know. Anything else you want to know about me? I don't know. Google. There's bios and stuff like that. But I do want to talk about what I came here to talk about. It all started when I worked at Azusa Pacific University in California, and a student came into my office, and she said, she was just miserable. The girl was a genius, really smart, bio major, getting ready to graduate. I think it was March, right before graduation, and she was, got this big time job overseas, and she was just miserable. And I'm like, what's wrong? Why are you so upset? And she was just like, I'm single and I'm never gonna get married. And I was like, wow, you have a 6-figure job that you're getting ready for, right? You're a bio major, you're a smart girl, you have a great family, I could literally look at her and see blessing upon blessing. And she was miserable, literally, pretty much clinically depressed. There was a point where, we had to walk her over to the counseling center. And she was not the only one. that I had come across. There was this thing called Ring by Spring that they had. They have this at like evangelical colleges, right? Some of you are shaking your head. And it's like this idea that you want to get a ring, in college, by the way, that you want to get a ring by spring before you graduate. And those that didn't have a ring by spring were either in relationships and like getting ready to like pretty much kill their boyfriend or whatever if they did not propose by their time, or they were, not in a relationship and just were like miserable trying to figure out why. But they felt like they weren't a part of this movement, right, of Ring by Spring, or this movement of being married by a particular time. And so I was counseling. Most of them were women, but were girls, but a lot of guys too. And so I was counseling a lot of them as just a campus pastor. A lot of them were like 20 years old, 19, 20, not even 21. And I'm like, what is this that's happening? What is going on, I didn't deal with it too much on the East Coast as much. This was really a West Coast sort of Christian evangelical school thing that was like more. But after I left there, I started opening my eyes and seeing it in different ways, right? This was just one way that it was manifesting itself. And so I was like really concerned about that. And so then I was like, okay, that has to be addressed in some way. And then when I started writing just about my life and some of the things that I had to sort of like conquer and overcome, whether it was image, definitely relationships, this idea that, like I had to reach like this deadline. There was a deadline that I had. There were all these themes that arose in my life that I wound up realizing, wow, it all comes back to singleness, right? It all comes back to whether or not I'm married, or whether it's identity, whether it's, like relationship. All these ideas sort of fell under this cloud. And that's where the Misinterpreted Gospel of Singleness came about. It's not just a book. It's not just, what I'm going to talk to you all about tonight. It literally is something that I think is that we need to have a healthy theology of singleness, because we have such healthy theologies of marriage, right? We know how to talk about marriage, especially Christian community. They can get up, and we have, like conferences on marriage, and there's all of these retreats and marriage couples, and it's like there's a confidence. But then when it comes to singleness, it's like, what do we do with the singles, right? It's like, oh, they're going bowling, there's this sort of uncomfortable, what do we do with them, right? Oh, the young people and the singles, right? The women and the singles, and then it's the singles. So it's like, okay, and then it's like, okay, I saw someone that had this like singles ministry that was like 18 to 45. And I'm like, why do I want to be in the room with an 18-year-old? You know what I mean? Like, everybody's at all these different stages of life. And it's not about age per se, right? But it is about stages of life. And so I started seeing like sort of like this weird, like, wow, there's a big marriage conference, and then there's this singles conference that's all about marriage. But the marriage conference has nothing to do with singles. It was just these weird messages. So that's how it all started, and that's what I want to talk to you all about. But I want to show you this quick video from Tracy Ellis Ross that I usually show that gets the conversation going. So first 3 minutes of it we're going to play.
I have been writing this speech in between trying to live my life and do a job, and I care what I say, so bear with me. And here we go. So, it is really interesting to be a woman and to get to 45 and to not be married yet and to not have kids, especially when you have just pushed out your 5th kid on television. You start hearing crazy stuff like, oh, you know what, sweetie, you just haven't found the right guy yet, or what are you gonna do? Or, oh, you poor thing. Why is someone like you still single? Have you ever thought of having kids? Or, you know what, why don't you just have a kid on your own? It's never ending. okay? And it's not helpful. I grew up planning a wedding. My dress was going to be corseted with multiple Victorian camisoles spilling off my shoulders, and I would change into a white, double-breasted suit with wide-leg trousers and a big cuff for the reception, and then I dreamed about being chosen by a powerful and sexy and kind man who had full lips and gave really good hugs and having a little baby. Yeah, I was specific. And having a little baby boy by the name of Lauren. But I also dreamed of winning an Oscar, being on the cover of magazines, and making a difference in the world and helping women find our voices. And from that dreaming, you guys, I've built a really incredible life, and I have become a woman that I am very proud to be. And then someone just walks up to you and, they're like, a friend of mine adopted at 52. I mean, it is never too late for your life to have meaning, sweetie. And my worth just gets diminished as I'm reminded that I have failed on the marriage and the carriage counts. Me. This bold, liberated, independent woman. I mean, guys, I work out, okay? I eat well. I mostly show up to work on time. I'm a good friend, a solid daughter, a hard worker. My credit's good. I take out the garbage before it gets smelly. I recycle, and I won a Golden Globe. I mean, I'm killing it. So why? Why? Why do I get snagged this way? And as if all that I've done and everything that who I am doesn't matter. And I look back and I think about all the ways that we're told that those two hashtag goals, being chosen and having kids, are what makes you worthy. I mean, nursery rhymes, fairy tales, books, movies, 16 Candles, every love song, and 16 Candles, that was a good one. And even Blackish are reiterating this narrow story of husband plus child equals woman. And by the way, that doesn't discount anyone who has a husband and a child. This is just my version of the narrow way that I am undermined.
Okay.
And by the way.
I love that video, and even though it's geared toward women, because many topics around singleness is geared toward women, right? That's in and inside and outside of the church. But women are the market, and it's mainly, I guess, because of patriarchy, right? But I love that beginning of that speech because she's like, I have a Golden Globe, right? Yet someone comes up to her and they're like, it's not too late for you to have kids. But they didn't say not too late for you to have kids. They were like, it's not too late for your life to have meaning. And I love that. I don't love that phrase, but I love that she said that phrase out loud, right? Because that's the underlying sentiment, right? That your life only has meaning if you have this. But it doesn't matter. And so what winds up happening is people, in general, it's like, especially those that aren't married, whether they've never been married, they're widowed, or whatever it is, they find themselves sort of on that singleness margin. They wind up finding these sort of different ways of having meaning, whether it's, I gotta get another degree, I just signed a book contract, I'm doing all these things, but to culture, whether it's Christian or outside or otherwise, it doesn't matter, right? So there's this race, and then it doesn't end there, because I have a friend who actually, she had, was trying to get into dental school her whole life. She wanted to be a dentist. And she, after, it took 10 years for her to get in, she just kept getting rejected. And I was even one of those naysayer friends that, after 8 years was like, girl, maybe God has something else for you, And then she got in, and I felt bad, right? So I was one of those people in the Bible, the naysayer of Job's friends. So after her first year, after she got in, she went to Howard Dental School, and after her first year, I was so proud of her. And I was like, how's it going? How was your first year? And she was just like, I just feel like I'm never gonna get married. And I'm like, sis, you just spent 10 years trying to get into dental school, right? I feel like I need to hear another testimony coming from you. And I completely understand. This is not to diminish people's desires at all, right? But at the same time, it's about putting it in perspective. And so she couldn't see the fact that it was okay, I'm in dental school, God's brought me here, it's taken me 10 years. But at the same time, at some point, I really do want to get married, The whole thing was clouded by the fact that she wasn't married yet. And I blame culture for that, for her, because had she felt comfortable and safe enough to just be, to just have her desires without her desires being influenced by Christian culture and outside culture, what would that look like, right? And that's the question that I just sort of want to ask, and I ask myself over and over again. I ask it when I'm dating, I'm just like, okay, am I still with this person because I really want to be with this person? You know what I mean? Or am I with them because, well, may as well? And there was this one guy I was seeing, it was a while ago, and it just didn't work. Like, he was a good guy, there wasn't no big falling out. It just really wasn't working. I just didn't see it. And I remember telling a friend of mine, like, I think we're at the point where I need to just maybe, like, end it, because I feel like I'm wasting his time. And she was like, girl, are you sure? Because I don't know if another one's gonna come along like this, And I was like, I feel like that's bad advice. Like, I remember saying that to her, like, I get why you're saying that, but I'm like, I feel like that's bad advice. You wanna know why? Because what if I take it and say, you know what, you're right, may as well, and then got married. And then 2 months into 2 years, well, some of us months, right? 2 years into the marriage, I'm like, this isn't working. Then there's this cycle, right? So that's another reason why I have these conversations and why I even wrote the book. I tell people it's not because I'm anti-marriage, it's because I'm trying to save marriages, right? There was a couple that, there was a couple at APU, actually. I knew they weren't right for each other, but I liked both of them, so I thought they were cute independently, right? And so I was like, oh, they're cute, and I never really said anything. And the girl came up to me, and she said, I read your book. You know what? She's like, I think I'm gonna break up with Chris. And I'm like, oh, that's not why. I don't want that to be the reason. And so she was just like, no, I was just thinking about it, and I think, I'm not really sure why I'm really dating him. I'm a senior, and I know I need to kind of go with the culture, but I feel confident enough to make this decision. So they break up. He's dating somebody else now, and she goes to become a flight attendant, for Air Alaska, and she's flying all over the country, and I'm watching her on Instagram, and I'm like, wow, she's doing her thing, right? And then she dates this pilot. Now she's married to the pilot, and I'm like, listen, you did well. He's really good looking. But she this was after 5, 6, 7 years. She kind of went off, explored, did her thing, found herself, her likes, her dislikes, traveled, and it just made an informed, godly decision, whatever that looked like for her. But what if she had went with the culture, right? What if she had kind of stuck with it and just did that may as well? And I think a lot of people do wind up doing that. Some of us, wind up being blessed enough to just sort of meet whoever that person is or are able to work it out. But a lot of times there are people that wind up just going with it. And I think that is perpetuating the cycle of divorce, to be honest. Unhealthy marriages. How many people, now that I'm in my mid-30s, I can't tell you how many of my friends or people that I know indirectly that are just waiting until the kids turn 18. Got married at 20 or whatever, and it's just like, okay, just forget it. So it's a message that's not just for single people. It is for us as general, right? It's for the community. It's for the church community. We have to stop perpetuating this if we're going to save marriages. If we're going to have healthy individuals, healthy marriages, whole people, we have to stop perpetuating the same negative message. I just want to read to you just sort of an intro at the time. So one of the things I wrote in the beginning, I recently heard a preacher speaking to his congregation about marriage and family. And when he touched on the topic of singleness, he offered singles a stern warning. He said that single people need to stop being angry with God because they are single. He said that they should wait patiently and be careful not to rush into anything. And while I wholeheartedly agreed with the latter part of his teaching, something about the first part just didn't sit right with me. I agree that people should take a step back when being angry with God for any relationship realities that they can't control. But at the same time, when it comes to people who are single, I would argue that any anger with God has been instigated by a negative message surrounding singleness in the Christian community. Perhaps single people wouldn't be as angry with God had they received messages of inclusion and acceptance from God's people, as opposed to the message that singleness is some form of biblical plague. If the message had been communicated that the status of one's relationship didn't define his or her worth in the kingdom of God, then I truly believe that many people who are single would be a lot more at peace in their singleness. They would not feel like their self-worth is devalued because they weren't married. They would embrace spiritual, physical, and emotional wholeness and realize that the world needs who they are as individuals. So there lies the problem. that celebration appears to reside only in those who join as one. Maybe there are no ceremonies or parties for people who are single. Regardless, I've realized that many find themselves more at the tail end of awkward jokes or caught in the middle of uncomfortable questions that seem more like interrogations rather than being celebrated for who they are, which is loved, cherished, and embraced by the community around them. So this is what I call the misinterpreted gospel of singleness, which is the next slide. It is well, actually, it's not the next slide. I don't know how we got there. So I'll read the definition, misinterpreted. I think it actually is the next slide, but you don't have to go to it. I'm going to read it, and then I'll reiterate it. You can go back to the second one. Okay, so the misinterpreted gospel of singleness is a negative message that's oftentimes unintentional. It's communicated to individuals over a period of time that causes them to adopt unhealthy views of self and relationships. And so we'll go back to that definition in a minute. I think this slide right here is important. Here you have marriage at the center, right? Which is usually how it is. That's sort of the visual. And then everybody else on the outskirts. And by everybody else, I'll go into it in another slide. Everybody else is anybody that does not fall into that spectrum of whether it's husband, wife, right, in the center. So if you're young and you're single, if your husband or wife passed away, if you're divorced, forget if you're divorced, right, and you're really marginalized, right? Wherever you find yourself outside of that spectrum, if you're not married, then you're outside and everyone else is at the center. There is something that I learned. I went to Temple University for undergrad, and I was an advertising major. I haven't done anything in that after, but one thing I learned as an advertising major was something called the accumulation of minimal effects theory. And so it's this view that the impact of any one message, which I'll break it down in a minute, any one message might be specific or on any specific individual might be minimal, but consistent, persistent, and corroborated messages result in minor changes among audiences that gradually add up over time to produce significant changes in society or culture. Okay, so that's like the intellectual definition. Okay, so here's a breakdown of that. It is, let's say, like, throw out a product of some sort, like something that you use or something that you like. Somebody throw one out. Kleenex, okay. That's a decent one. I'm trying to think how, right? Okay, so let's say as an advertiser that my goal would be to get Kleenex before your eyes and your ears at least 100 times every day as an advertiser, right? Without you noticing it. So with like food and other types of things that deal with your senses, it's a little bit easier, but it doesn't matter. Even with something like Kleenex, it would be, okay, I gotta make sure that this Kleenex ad is running every 20 minutes or every hour on the hour, right? I gotta make sure that there is like a Kleenex, billboard, on the highway that you happen to see, Also, word of mouth is a big thing. So somebody like me just saying Kleenex a bunch of times, right now, a week from now, you'll be like, I need some Kleenex at the store, right? And not even realize it. So the whole idea is so that at the end of the day, or one point during the course of this week, that you will desire Kleenex, right? Or that you'll be in the store and you'll see a bunch of different boxes of tissue and there'll be different brands, but you'll choose Kleenex because you've heard it and you've seen it so many times. So that's the whole point of advertising. It really works with kids, right? Especially since they're just so easily influenced by their senses. It really works with food. It works with just anything. And that's why when you're online and there's that like kiosk while you're waiting in line and you have something there and you're like, I need lip gloss, and you don't need lip gloss, but it's there, right? Because the longer you wait, the more times you'll look over, and they're counting on, if you would have just walked past it, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but they're counting on the times that you're there looking at it to sort of influence you in some way. My argument is it's the same thing with just about anything, right? And particularly with this message around singleness. The message around singleness has been so negative for so long that it is bad to be single. Even if you say you are independent, You know, like that sort of patronizing thing that we do with people, like after they have a breakup or, whatever. Even though we're very much indoctrinated by the negative culture, we do that. It's okay, girl. You don't need anybody but Jesus. Like it's okay. You're fine. You're fine all by yourself. You can do bad all by yourself. Like we have all these cliched phrases that we say, but we really don't believe it. Why? Because the culture has been it's like infused these messages so much in us that we automatically know that it's like not a good thing to be single, right? And it's even worse in the church. It's even worse in the Christian community. We do a really, really good job of ostracizing people just in our normal Sunday morning communication. If the pastor, he or she or whoever is up and they're speaking, the majority of their references in their sermons, a lot of them have to do with husband-wife stuff, which is fine because a lot of times, they're married, so you use those types of examples, right? But even if they're not using personal examples, it's always a husband and wife kid example of some sort, right? Which is fine, again, no problem whatsoever, but it becomes an issue when other types of examples never get in there. So it sort of adds, and I say unintentionally in the definition, it adds unintentionally, I think, in many cases, to this negative stigma around singleness. So the next slide is the actual definition of singleness, which I mentioned. So again, it's similar to accumulation of minimal effects. It's a negative message that is communicated over a period of time. And if you hear it your whole life, it causes you to adopt unhealthy views of yourself and of relationships. So we've created this negative culture around singleness, right? And here's an example. You still have time. How old are you? You still got time, right? So I'm like, well, at what point don't I have time? Because it's saying something else, right? This one person I remember, it was a while ago. It was like my birthday, and it was Sky Church, and he's like, how old are you? He's like, better hurry up. You're getting up there. And I'm like, I feel like you need to be giving me different advice because you're on divorce number 2. Okay? But it didn't matter that he was on divorce number 2 and that he should be telling me not don't get married, but he should be giving me different types of advice. It didn't matter. He was so infused in the culture that the only thing that he could say to me on my birthday of all days is I better hurry up, right? And most people, it's weird. They say these ignorant things, and they don't even realize that it's, the way that it comes off. If it's your uncle or somebody at at Thanksgiving or whatever, and you're like, was that supposed to make me feel good? And I'm now that I've done this research and I've written this book and had these conversations, I've started asking these questions of people, right, even of my friends, where I'm like, was that good advice? And then what winds up happening is they stand back and they're like, I guess it wasn't. But we're so used to it. And I was very much a part of it. Just making comments and saying stuff to people that doesn't make them feel good. And not only does it not make them feel good, it leads them to making bad decisions. And I'm really tired of seeing my friends in bad relationships, unhealthy relationships, just for the sake of just being in relationships, right? Even phrases like, you still have worth, even though you're not, married. So what is that saying, right? Still have worth? Why don't we change our language a bit and be like, you have worth, right? And it's just about being sensitive. It's about adopting a new language. And it's not about shaming people, even though, it is kind of funny. And when I first started with this book, I was much, much more feisty about it. But the more I've talked, I had this woman come up to me after one talk, and she is married and has kids, and she came up and she's crying, and she's just like, I just need to repent because I've been doing this to my daughter, and I didn't even realize it, And that really stopped me right there because I was like, oh, wow, people just, they don't realize it. That's how much the culture has been against and negative with singleness. That people are saying things and making comments and, making choices, and they don't even realize, they're doing it. Joking at somebody else's expense, you better hurry up, you're getting up there, like he said, or when are you gonna settle down? The people that were saying those things to Tracy Ellis Ross, I think they thought they were doing her a favor or something? You know what I mean? I think they did. People think that they have good intentions behind it until you call them out on it, right? So it's like, when are you going to hurry up? Or when are you going to finally? And it's just like, wow, so by saying that, what are you saying about where I am now in life, right? And we need to be more honest as a culture by saying we have centered marriage to the point where we have excluded those that are on the outskirts. And that's not what the body of Christ is about, right? The outside culture can be that way, but that's not what we were supposed to be revolutionary. We're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be different, right? So yes, we're supposed to honor marriage. So we're supposed to honor marriage so much that we honor every aspect, every branch of where people are. That's how you honor marriage, right? That's how you honor family. And actually, family was more important than just this one, sort of like institution. It was all about recreating the family of God. Now you're a part, and you're a part, and you're a part. In my religion and film, I teach a class called Religion and Film, and this is just a random side note. We're on this unit where we watched Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore or whatever, and I'm dealing with like Gen Z, so they're all like younger, and so most of these movies they've never seen before, That showed Matrix, and they were like, what is this? It's really sad. So we watched Ghost, and last week we were on like near-death experiences, and we were watching random people's stories on YouTube of whatever experiences that they had. And we watched 6 different people, different backgrounds from different parts of the world, actually. And one thing that they all said, well, there was a few things they all said that were consistent, not to spook you out. But one thing that they all said was that when they got to where they were going, they saw people that they knew, but they all said, I saw people that I didn't know, but I still felt that I felt the same connection with the people that I didn't know with the people that I did know. And when we talked about the videos, all the kids pointed it out. They were like, yeah, I thought that was so interesting that they all felt a connection with everyone, right? And I'm like, wow, I thought that was so profound. And I'm mentioning that because I'm like, that's what it's about, right? It's about feeling so connected to somebody else that even though this could be your mom or your dad or your uncle or your sister or your brother, that same connection that you feel with these people, you feel with someone else. I think that's the goal of where we're trying to go, right? That's like the ideal, this like beloved community, this family of God. And if that's the ideal, and if we're praying thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then I really truly believe that the will on earth is likened to the will in heaven, right? To be connected with one another. And that message extends beyond singleness, I think. But when we're talking about family of God, the idea is to be so one. So when we're having communion and we're breaking bread with one another, right? That my connection to you all is just as strong as it would be with somebody that I know well. That's the goal, right? So if that's the goal, then how come anybody that walks in the doors, God bless you, that walks within the doors of the church ever feels excluded? That's so anti-Christ, right? So if it's that way just in general, I feel like it's the same way when it comes to people feeling like they're not relationally connected to another human being, and so therefore they feel on the outskirts of the church. That's anti-Christ. That's not the way it's supposed to be, right? So there's this idea that churches are creating uncomfortable environments for singles, unfortunately, and a lot of them don't realize that they're creating uncomfortable environments. There was one example that I wrote in the book of, I'm at this church and, I'm sitting in the audience or sitting in the congregation, and the pastor's like, raise your hand if you're single, raise your hand, and you're like, and he's like, ha, 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 your husband or wife might be here, ha, ha. He's like joking, and he's really funny, and I'm just like, okay, and then he's like, the marriage conference coming up, but we're going to have a singles conference for you guys, your husband or wife is probably going to be at that singles conference, and you're like, and what about the people in there like, I don't care, that's not why, you know what I mean, that's not why I'm here, it's not why I'm coming. I've had so many, instances where I've been in churches where I felt uncomfortable, right? Or where the message had nothing to do with me because the message was all about somebody finding a spouse or whatever, right? And it's a whole series on it. There's another thing that churches do to create uncomfortable environments, and that's shaming, people feeling bad or feeling like there's a right way to do things. I remember there was this couple no names, that, they I went to this guy's church, and then I guess he got divorced from his wife, and then he got, I think he started dating another famous somebody. And I remember it was 3 months into their relationship, they were having a Twitter chat on how to date. And people were like, oh, thank you so much, Pastor such and such, and whatever his girlfriend is, who's now his wife, whatever. But it was there's so much wisdom. And I'm just okay, and again, not knocking them by any means, but I was he just got divorced. Not only did he just get divorced, but he started dating her, and it's been 3 months, and now all of a sudden, you guys have the way of doing it. Right? And so there's that attitude, that sort of patronizing, this is the way to do it. This is the right way. There's the exclusive club, oh, you join the club now, you can't be friends with anybody single anymore, right? Because, you're part of this group. Or the promised land, when you get married or you're here, you finally reach this place in this sort of plateau. And then lastly, the deadline, that there is a line that you have to reach. And it's particularly for women that they're oh my God, I'm 35 and I'm not married. You know what I mean? Or I don't have kids. Or a friend of mine who was divorced, she got married at 30, was divorced at 33, and it was oh my God, what am I gonna do? So what happens as a result of all of this? Depression, insecurity, rushing into a relationship. I know somebody that had a baby just to shut everybody up, and it worked. To be honest, everybody was talking to her, talking around her about her, when are you gonna get married, and when are you gonna, and she just had a baby, and people have left her alone, for now at least, right? And it worked. So here's just a few quick testimonials on paper. Someone wrote, I'm not married to Jesus. I'm 38. I'm still single. And the thought of being married to Jesus is not something that makes me happy. She said, I feel alone and hurt by that. I had to miss my 20-year high school reunion because of how embarrassed I feel that I'm not married. And that's bad. That's sad. But I understand. You see what I mean? And not that I think that she needed to go and just suck it up. I actually think that she probably shouldn't have gone, because had she gone, she probably would have felt worse about herself. Jesus is not my husband in any way. He's not my +1 to any event. I hate to say this, but I think it's a very unfair concept to push that on anyone who wants to marry. And as a result, I resent Jesus for this. That is so sad. I was told God had called me to be single and to serve him instead. And a girl who I don't know suggested that 10 years ago, and that killed my confidence and my trust in God. And it's hard enough that I can't have kids, but to be told that Jesus is my husband, if so, I want a divorce. We are not married, and there's never been a marriage. And stupid ideas like that have had these consequences and bad effects, and it's ruined me on so many levels. Jesus died for me, and I accept that, but he's in no way my husband, nor am I his wife, period. And she wrote that in a comment section on my thing. And I was almost in tears reading that, because why should she feel like that? Why should she feel that bad, Here's another one. I'm 41, I'm never married, but I have had a desire to be married for my entire life. However, it's not easy being in a church that doesn't even announce that they have any groups or anything for me. They're quick to do announcements for married couples, marriage, and family-oriented things, or even men's and women's group, but they ignore anyone that's outside of that. It's like they're sweeping singles under the rug, out of sight and out of mind, like we're their dirty little secret. Yes, the group got a mention on the church website, but not on the main church page. And anyway, so she said, with that being said, a comment you made about life starting after marriage, for me, when I say that I feel like my life hasn't started, I'm referring to things changing in my life. I know life is going on and ongoing, but I feel like I've been dealing with these things like financial stress and singleness for over 20 years. Making about half of what I should be making, barely scraping to pay any bills, etc. Yes, I have single friends and we go out. Yes, I'm very active in a singles group, but I still want to move past this phase of my life and get on with things because I feel like I've done nothing with my life, right? Those types of comments are the result of this negative message, and these people feel ostracized, and they're quiet in our churches and they're quiet in our congregations, and they don't say anything. Right? So the next slide, here's the variations of singleness. There's more people that are in these categories than just one category of being married, right? Single and never married with no kids. And then there's the single parent that definitely needs to be addressed, the single parent who's never been married. And then there's a single parent that has been married and is divorced. So there's divorced in general. There's the single young adult that we need to make sure that we properly put in this proper category. We have single 35 plus. We have widowed, and I'm sure there are other categories in there. People finding themselves at different places and spectrums in life, but we don't address them. It's just singles, and then that's it, you know. And it's singles and the young people, and it's you know, and it's mainly the sentiment is that you're single and you've never had kids and you've never been married. But there's all these other places that people find themselves at that aren't really addressed. Nor do you hear samples and examples. I would be curious, and I know this would be hard, but as like if you're a pastor of a church, how do you use these examples in your sermons, right? Like not every single sermon needs to include every single one. That's not what I'm saying. But if there are times where you do include stories of your marriage, or of somebody else's marriage, or whatever it might be, that's beautiful. But how, at one point, will you use a sample of a single mother or a single father, you know, raising kids, or a single person who is in their 40s, right, who is divorced? Or I have 2 friends who are widowed, you know, and they're in their 30s that I've had to, you know, walk through in life. And you know, how do you address them in your sermons or in your Bible studies or whatever it might be, making sure that they too are represented? Because representation, we use those words, but we use it a lot when it comes to gender and ethnicity, right? But there's representation in other categories too. And so how do you make people feel a part of your congregation in your messages or whatever it is that you're doing? But not just as pastors, but just all of us in general, just in our everyday everything. How are we being more inclusive on our jobs, or just at the dinner table? You know what I mean? Like where most people dread anyway, Thanksgiving or Christmas dinners or whatever it might be. You know, if there's somebody, a part of your family that finds themselves in another category, whatever that category might be, how are you making them feel a part of the family? A quote, then the next slide. Dr. Scott Daniels, who was a professor at Azusa Pacific University, I heard him speak, and he said, "We have been so shaped by a romanticized view of love that almost everybody in this room, if you don't get married, will consider that some form of failure in your life." And he said that to a room full of college students, and they were like, yeah. Next slide. Rodney Clapp from Families at a Crossroads. He said, we need to re-examine the reasons for seeing singleness as good so that in a confused and searching postmodern world, we can reassert the goodness of singles for the right reasons. Only so, as we shall see, that can we reinsert the goodness of family and the goodness of freedom for the right reasons. So I love that, re-examining seeing singleness as good. The goodness of singleness. That's what I would love to hear. Like, you know, it's like, okay, yes, like we're having the marriage, like the next series and sermon series is on marriage and the beauty of marriage. And then the one after that is going to be on the goodness of singleness, right? Now, everybody got to stay for it. You see what I mean? Because what winds up happening? It's assumed that everybody's going to be here for the goodness of marriage, and then those that are married, you can leave out the room for the goodness of singleness, right? It's not to say that that message will bring them back to where they were, wherever, you know, again, negativity, the idea that you're going back and you're taking these back steps, right? But what can we learn from the goodness of singleness? What can all of us learn from the goodness of singleness? Just as much as what can we learn from marriage, what can we learn from singleness? And there's this assumption, like I said, that there's so much that can be learned from marriage. There's an assumption that if I'm speaking on marriage in this room, that everybody in here should be all ears, you should be listening because there's something in it that God has for you. But let's talk about the goodness of singleness, then it's only for certain ears. So what is it? That's what we have to explore. What is it in singleness that would be significant and important? The next quote is from Caitlin Beatty, and she wrote, "In subtle and not so subtle ways, perhaps local churches have acted as if monogamous sexual unions are the closest icon of heaven in this life. that no matter how much self-giving ministry or cultural creativity we undertake in our lifetimes, that they are second best without a spouse and children in tow. And so long as marriage ascends into the echelons of existential imperative, you must have this in order to be a complete human being, then my singleness becomes a problem, right? So I love, like, she says a lot in that, but the end is, my singleness is a problem only when you have to have this in order to be complete. So if you have to have this and this joining together to be a complete human being, then me walking in singleness, goodness, confidence, and all of that, if the message is that completeness only comes from this, then it's always going to be a problem that you're single, no matter how many cliches we tell people that they're doing good or bad all by themselves or whatever, right? So we need to change the overall message. And then last quote is from Pastor Jamie Noling-Off, another coworker of mine. And she said, within true Christian community, there are no singles. Jamie was like revolutionary. There is no such thing as singles. She said, as 1 Corinthians 12 describes, we are the body. We are family. And so to assume that all singles should be relegated into a group where they should remain until they meet someone to legitimize their participation in the life of the congregation shows disregard for an important theological premise. God is the only one who legitimizes our participation in the congregation, not a spouse or anything or anyone else. So I love that. And this is Jamie, married up in Oregon with 3 boys, chilling. You know what I mean? But she has this sort of radical view, and I love that because I want to hear more people who are married, you know what I mean, have such a radical view of singleness. It should not fall on those that are single to always deliver this message of singleness, right? And we say this a lot even with people of color, right? It shouldn't always fall on people of color to be the teachable moment. It shouldn't always fall on people who are single to be the ones to assert the fact that, wait a minute, you know? And so one thing, the first singleness event that I've ever been to that I actually didn't cringe, I was invited to this summer, and it was the pastor's wife, and she put on this event, and it was there were flowers. It was for women mainly, and well, it was only for women. And there's flowers at the table, and it's whatever stage in life you find yourself in, you know, it was really good. They talked about finances, they talked about a whole bunch of things, and then I got up and talked about this, and it was it was put on by her though. You see what I mean? She didn't leave it to the person that's single, that's in charge of the singles ministry to do it. She was very much invested in the life of the congregation of the church. You know what I mean? And that included everybody. And I never felt once that she was your next girl. I didn't get that sense from her when I was there, which is what you get a lot with people who are married. So, but on the other end, I went to another singles event where I was on a panel, and it was a singles event, and everyone on the panel was either married or engaged. And then there was me, and I remember sitting there why am I even here? This has nothing to do with singleness. You know what I mean? It has to do with, hey, everybody, look at us. We're really cute. You know, we finish each other's sentences, and you should be like us. You know, and that's really what it was. And if that's the type, that's a type of singles event. You see what I mean? That is one type. That is not the definitive way that we should go about doing singles events and things like that. But they made it, though, as though that was the way. And I'm they were asking questions, and the girls and the guys in the room were great, you know, but they were so tell me about your first date, you know, or tell me about this. And then it was oh, what do we do with the girl in the end? Do you date? You know, that was more of why I was there. So the next slide is sort of a side-by-side of how it should be, how it is, and how it should be. So I showed you the first one where there was marriage at the center and then everybody else was on the outside. But then where we need to be going, there should be an arrow there. I would normally put an arrow there where it should be everyone is family. That's really where we need to be. When I talked about that near-death experience thing where everybody was connected, right? That's where we need to be. Everybody's connected. There's a passage where Jesus is hanging out with his disciples or whatever and talking to some people, and his disciples come in and they're your mother and your brother are outside. You need to leave what you're doing here and go, you know, deal with them. And Jesus is well, who are my mother and my brothers? They're good, you know? And I'm not using that as an example to, you know, say that we should not be paying attention to our family. But what I am saying is, I think in that moment, Jesus was sort of revolutionizing family, right? Where he's who are my mother and my brothers? We are my mother and my brothers, right? We are the body of Christ. We are the family of God. And that's how people should feel, right? It was like, I wonder how the people that were in that room were feeling when they overheard him saying that, like, wow, I'm the family, like I'm a part of his family, which is so cool, where they may have felt apart, where he didn't leave them for a minute to go be with this, group that was more important than they were. Sorry, guys, But they probably in that moment felt like, wow, I'm a part of this larger thing. I've only been in a few instances where I felt like that. My old boss in California, who I always talk about, and his family, we're just really very close. And I remember when I first moved out there, and they would be like, you can come lay on our couch and like take a nap if you ever want to. And I'm like Jersey girl who doesn't trust anybody, so I was like, no thanks, and they were just really kind and very West Coast, it was just new to me. And, but now, that was however many years ago, but the more I would turn them down, but they still invited me, like, hey, their son Ryan, it's like, Ryan's got a basketball game on Sunday, like, we'd love for you to come, and I'm like, okay, so I was coming to the basketball games and the swim meets, and me, this little black girl, and this little family, just coming in, and the grandparents are there, and people are they're like, come on, Christy, Ryan's, he just scored such points, and I'm like, okay, and then I'm sitting down, and it wasn't I didn't feel odd. It wasn't a racial thing. I'm not using that as an example, for any other reason other than I felt just very much a part of the family, And then one of the kids was baptized, and my boss was a pastor, and so he baptized him in his backyard and in the pool, and the whole family's there, and I'm taking pictures, and the dog's running around, and it was just a beautiful moment, and I'm like, this is my family, you know what I mean? And I never feel single. Whatever that means, I never feel single when I'm with them, ever. I don't feel anything. I don't feel categorized. I'm just a part of the family and just hanging out, and we're friends. And when they're together, they're a cute couple, but I don't feel like we're a couple and you're not. I don't feel anything. I just feel like one. And oh man, how awesome would it be if we just made people feel like that? If we all felt that way no matter where they find themselves, right? There was another example of a friend of mine named Tim, and Tim was divorced, and he's remarried now, but Tim always says, I met two women in my church, both single. In the beginning, I had a hard time hanging out with them. They were always like, hey, you want to come to movies with us? Hey, you want to but they weren't coming on to him at all. And he was like, I don't know if this looks right, or, he just wasn't sure. And the three of them wound up being the closest friends. They were part of this book club together, not just the three of them, but there was other people at different places in life. And the two, one of them, I think wound up I think she got pregnant and then wasn't with the guy, or I don't know what happened, but her and her friend wound up moving in together, and her friend was like, I'll help you co-parent the child since you're, since the guy's not around anymore, I love you that much. And so people are like, are they lesbians? And they're like, no, we're just co-parent, I'm helping my best friend out, and we moved in together, and Tim comes over, divorced Tim, and he's hanging out, and then Tim starts dating this woman named Cindy, and so it's Tim, Cindy, and the single mom, and her best friend, and they're all hanging out, and they're all best friends, and they're all a community. And I love it. I love their story because they go around, they tell it, and they're still friends to this day. And I just think it's really beautiful. So passages though, many, we're one body in Christ, or if one member suffers, then we all suffer together. Why don't we just start using that, right? Why don't we start applying that to where we are relationally? So just a few other things, just examples, the next slide is books that have to do on singleness. And you can just see the titles, Lady in Waiting, What to Do Until Love Finds You. They were single too. I mean, just it's just depressing. And it is the episode of Sex and the City, right? Do you remember that one? My friend Ashley's in the back. I use it as an example all the time where Charlotte, the character Charlotte is looking for books. Was it books on divorce or? What? No, it was she's in the bookstore, and somebody had recommended a book for her. Yeah. So, and it was starting over yet again. but she like didn't want anybody to see her going into the section, so she like tiptoes into the section, and then there's this woman that's there, and she's reading this book, and this woman is like crying, and she just looks really depressed and really like miserable, and so the woman's like, I think this book is really good, and like whatever she's saying, and so Charlotte's like, oh, I'm not looking for that, I'm looking for travel section, and she's like, travel, it's just funny. And that's what I think of when I think of these books, because they're just depressing, but if there are people that want those types of books, then that's fine, but these are the only types of books that there are, right? A lot of times. How to be found by the man you've been looking for. Hello, my name is Single. That's an actual book, and it was another episode, actually. Did I kiss marriage goodbye? I mean, these are the books that they give, and it's like, okay, how is this supposed to instill any level of self-worth or confidence in me? They're titles that are titles that are geared toward women, and it's geared toward their emotions, and it's not necessarily geared toward helping. It doesn't seem like they're geared toward helping, right? They're using these sort of keywords to play and manipulate on their emotions and actually not make them feel better, right? Here's some examples of conferences. Next slide. So what's something that you notice? Just what do you notice? Desperate. The word desperate is huge, but the title is not Single and Desperate. It's Single but Not Desperate, right? And it's all couples. Majority of singles conferences are couples, though. They're not, so when I was talking about people that are married, I would love to see more married people, kind of on the front lines of perpetuating a more healthy and positive message around singleness, right? But I think what a lot of married people or couples do is they're like, yeah, I'm gonna be on the front lines, but I'm gonna tell you how you can be like me, right? Or how you can become what I've done, and you'll get this. This is how you write a list. Okay, I think that God can bless a list. Don't get me wrong, right? That this is how I did it, and you can do it that way too. And sometimes it works for people, and sometimes it doesn't. But these are messages that, remember I said that accumulation and minimal effects thing? We don't even realize we're doing it. We're perpetuating these types of messages, those books. And so this one does the same thing. Single, and then you see but not. When in all actuality, the but not should be the bigger, more bold words, right? And the single and the desperate should really be maybe the smaller ones, so that's emphasized, but not, right? Then I would take it a little bit more serious. But like you said, they're all married couples except for, that's Real Talk Kim from Twitter, right? But for the most part, every time, and I love Megan Good and Devon, but they only talk about how they did it, right? That's all they talk about. So, I don't want to hear it. Okay, so next slide. What do we see here? Party of one. Ministry, conference, singles. So living single with faith, purpose, and passion is really small, but party of one. So I'm sad. Release my mate. I might go to that one, though. That one looks good. I mean, if it works, I want my money back if it doesn't work. That one's a little stronger. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going because my mate, he's going to be released. Right, released. Well, he might be because there's shackles at the top, but the shackles are in hearts. You see, they're heart shackles. Okay, here's the next one. 50 Shades of Single. I really don't know what this message is. I would want to go. There's a few I want to go to, because I would be that person that's like, can you explain to me what the 50 Shades of Single are? All of them, 1, 2, 3. I want to go through all of them. Or were you just saying it? There's wedding rings. Because singles conferences are all about being married, or all about trying to be married or getting to marriage or whatever, when again, that's one aspect of singleness. but it's not my life. That's not all I do or wake up in the morning and do. But honestly, for a minute, it was, because I was so like, the messages were so in my head and in my heart that for years it was like, you wake up and it doesn't matter what my job is or what family is there. My family is still around, which I'm so grateful, like, then it was all like, oh, I'm still single, like, or I gotta find someone or whatever. So yeah, there's 50 Shades. It really should be 50 Shades of Marriage because there's wedding rings, but okay. So the next one, the two shall be one singles tour. I'm looking at it like it's the first time. Coming to a city near you, releasing singles into marriage. That's another one I'm going to. No, I'm just kidding. Releasing singles into marriage and healing relationships supernaturally. That's in the small print. You can't see it. So you got to be released into marriage. But again, there's these sort of negative messaging behind it. And I think this might be the last one. It's the best one. This is the best one. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I'm scared. It looks like, having seen the movie It, this scares me. Exposing the Joker in your potential partner. It needs to be exposing the Joker in your ex. Like, they need to, like, I don't get this then. I'm exposing the Joker in your potential partner. I miss you. I don't know. I don't know why it's called I miss you. That's why I said I think it should be exposing I would get it if they said exposing the Joker in your ex, right? Because then it would be like, oh, you always miss this person, but, you romanticize. Hindsight is 20/20. I don't know. I'm just making it up as I go, but I don't want to go to this one. Okay, so last few slides. Healthy singles and healthy churches. People embrace the single adult for who they are. This is what it would look like ideally. They feel more accepted as single adults. So that if you can gauge, I would love to do like a sort of survey of congregations and see how people feel, if they feel this way. And if they don't, then this is sort of the gauge that I use. They should feel most part of the church community. The church communicates that there's nothing wrong with them because they are single. They are considered in sermons and other church communications. Singles are happy as single people, but also express that they would be happy if they were married, right? So that's also a real thing, desire. And again, I like to focus on healthy desire that's not clouded by these negative messages. And I love to see, I use the girl that got married to the pilot as an example, because I'm like, they made that decision. She made that, you know what I mean? There wasn't anything clouding it. She just fell in love with this guy, and she had a desire to get married, but it had nothing to do with TikTok, or a ring by spring, or whatever it is that she felt. She just married him, Single individuals enjoy having the space and time to devote themselves to faith and prayer, help others, or pursue a ministry, spend time with friends and family, socialize with close friends, date or choose not to date. They just feel that freedom, I feel like this is how healthy singles should be in healthy churches and families, as well as friendships. You know what I mean? Making sure that, if I ever get married, I'm just going to, and I try to do it now anyway, that no one in my life is going to feel like they're the other. You know what I mean? It's going to feel like every time, somebody, I guess it's your cousin or somebody got married, and it was like, you next, girl, and it was like, why don't you just be married? Why does this have to come at me? And so, lastly, one of the things I say in my book is that singleness is a call to freedom, wholeness, and community. And so when people ask me, well, what do you mean by gospel of singleness? Or what do you mean by, call to singleness? Or when I was saying, what can married people learn from single people? Single people need to be really pursuing and working on wholeness in every area of life, which is spirit, soul, and body, you know? And that there's no such thing, like Jamie said, as being single. If you're part of the body, you know, if you're part of this community, there is no such thing as single, she says, you know? We're all family, we're all a part. And so as a result, singleness means you're called to community, right? You're called to be a part. And so had I ostracized myself in California all 4 years and didn't like take Woody and his family or whoever else up on it, you know, it's like, no, you're not supposed to be living in that complete isolation. Like you're a part of us, you're a part of this family. You're connected to all of us, right? So you're called to community, but you're also called to wholeness. You're called to walking in wholeness. But you're also called to freedom and working out that individuality. So that's it. You don't have to play the last video. We're just going to go in any like questions or comments or anything anybody says, because I kind of went over. And thanks for listening.